Kang Tae-hyun had more money than he could ever spend, and not one person in his life he was sure he could trust. So he did something strange. He handed three women in his life a card with no limit, no rules, no questions asked, and simply told them to spend it however they wished. But this was never really about the money, and what Tae-hyun was quietly trying to find out, none of them suspected. Two of them showed him exactly who they were. But Simone, the quiet housekeeper everyone had spent years overlooking, did something he never saw coming. Something that would stay with him long after the last one was spent. Stay with me. If stories about real character and quiet dignity move you, do me one small favor before we begin. Tap subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications so the next story finds you. Now pour something warm, get comfortable, and let's step into Seoul. The rain over Hanam-dong came down thin and silver that morning, blurring the river into a long gray ribbon far below the glass. Kang Tae-hyun stood at the window of his penthouse with a cup of barley tea cooling in his hand, watching the city wake without him. 51 floors down, Seoul moved the way it always did, fast, hungry, certain of itself. Up here, nothing moved at all. He wore a charcoal suit with the collar open and no tie, and to anyone who saw the covers of the business magazines, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. The chairman of Hanseong Group, third generation of the family that built half the ports on the southern coast and put its name on hotels in 9 countries. His face sold newspapers. His signature moved markets. And still, standing in the most expensive silence money could buy, he felt the same thing he felt every morning, a hollowness that no quarterly report had ever managed to fill. "Sir, the car is downstairs whenever you're ready." The voice came from the edge of the room, soft, careful, unwilling to step past the invisible line that servants in that house had always been taught to respect. Simone Adeyemi stood near the hallway with a folded cloth over one arm, her dark hair pinned back, her housekeeper's uniform pressed and plain. She did not look at him directly. She never did, unless spoken to first. "Thank you, Simone," he said, and she gave a small nod and was gone as quietly as she had come, the way she moved through every room of that penthouse, like someone determined to leave no trace of herself behind. Tae-hyun turned back to the glass. He did not need to be anywhere today. The board could run without him. His chief of staff had already cleared and re-cleared his calendar. His phone buzzed against the marble counter, and he glanced at it. A message from Yura, sent from a beach in Jeju, 3 photos of herself against the ocean, sunglasses, a new watch turned deliberately toward the camera, and the words, "Miss you, Oppa. Wait till you see what I bought." He set the phone face down without answering. He did not feel missed. He felt inventoried. He had felt it for years now, the sense that everyone who smiled at him was quietly counting, that even affection in his world arrived with an invoice folded inside it. He thought, sometimes, about how strange it was that in a household of a dozen people, the only presence that ever softened the cold of the place was the one nobody noticed. Simone did not fill a room the way Yura did, or command it the way Seo-yeon did. She simply left every space a little better than she had found it, the flowers on the hall table turned toward the light, the book he had left face down on the arm of a chair, closed gently around a folded slip of paper so he would not lose his page. The bitter medicine he took for his stomach set out each night beside a glass of warm water he had never once asked for. He had never thanked her for any of it, because he had never been sure she meant for him to notice. She just did it, the way some people breathe. A soft chime, and then Young Seo-yeon walked in without waiting, tablet already lit, heels sharp against the floor. She was brilliant, and she knew it, 5 years at his side, never late, never wrong, dressed today in a slate suit with a single silver pin at the collar. "Good morning, Chairman. I've moved the Busan Port Review to Thursday and the Singapore call to next week. Here's the revised, not today, Seo-yeon." He didn't turn. "Clear everything. The whole week." She paused, just a beat, the way a machine pauses when it hits a value it didn't expect. Everything? There's the investor dinner Friday. Cancel it or move it. I don't care. She recovered instantly, nodded, tapped the screen. Of course. But he had heard the pause, and he had learned, over years of rooms full of people who wanted things, to listen to pauses more than to words. He walked into his study and shut the door, and the noise of the world went with it. This was the only room in the penthouse that felt like it belonged to a person and not to a brand. Worn novels leaned against philosophy on the shelves. On the desk sat a single photograph in a plain frame, his mother, taken decades ago in the doorway of a small hammock, laughing at something outside the picture. She had married into the Kang family and never once belonged to it. His father had built the empire the way other men build fortresses, and he had raised his son the same way, every warmth rationed, every kindness made to feel like a payment for good behavior. Praise was a transaction. You earned it with results and lost it with failure. And love, if the thing he grew up with could be called that, always came with terms. But his mother used to pull him into the kitchen when the big house got too cold, and she would say the thing he still heard in her voice all these years later. A house is not warm because of the marble. Tae-hyun, ah. It is warm because of the hands that tend the hearth. She had died 2 springs ago. He had buried her with a state funeral she would have hated, and had felt more alone the following morning than he had ever felt in his life. He sat heavily in the chair and thought about the 3 women who filled the edges of his days. Yura, beautiful, luminous, the daughter of a fashion house and the star of her own glittering little universe online. When the gifts flowed, so did her tenderness. When they slowed, she grew distracted, restless, cool, and he had begun to feel less like a man she loved than a sponsor she had not yet decided to drop. Seo-yun, indispensable, exact, ambitious, in a way that had begun to unsettle him. Months ago, he had overheard her at a company function, laughing with a friend, saying that if she played her position correctly, she would not be an assistant much longer, she would be a Kang. The sentence had stuck to him like a stain. And then there was Simone. Quiet, watchful Simone, who had come to this country chasing something and lost it, and who now cleaned his floors and pressed his shirts and asked for nothing at all. He remembered the night, months back, when he had passed the service kitchen and heard her on the phone, in low, careful Korean, then in English, speaking to a hospital in Atlanta about a bill for her younger brother's care. He had offered, the next morning, to simply take care of it. She had looked at him with something between gratitude and steel and said, "That's not your burden to carry, sir. I'll manage." He had never forgotten it. Who, in his world, ever said no to his money? There had been another night, too, that he had never mentioned to anyone. A winter storm had knocked the power out across half the block, and he had come down to the service kitchen for water and found her working by the light of a single candle, wrapping the leftover banchan into neat parcels. When he asked what she was doing, she said the night guard at the gate had a family and a long shift and no dinner waiting for him, and that food spoiled whether you gave it away or threw it out, so you might as well give it away. She had said it the way other people recite the weather, as though it were simply the obvious shape of things, and gone back to her folding. He had stood in that dark, cold kitchen a long moment, a billionaire holding an empty glass. And then he had gone back upstairs to his empty floor and lain awake wondering when the last time was that anyone had thought of him the way she thought of a security guard she barely knew. He picked up a pen and wrote 3 names on a pad. Yura, Seo-yun, Simone, 3 women, 3 roles, 3 futures. And a thought that had been forming for weeks finally hardened into a decision. What if he could see them without the performance? Strip away the smiles calibrated for him, the answers rehearsed for him, and simply watch what each of them did when handed the one thing that reveals a person faster than anything else: freedom without consequence. He tapped the pen twice against the desk, then reached for the phone and dialed the one man in his life who never asked why. Yoon, his head of security, answered on the first ring. Chairman, I'm going to give 3 people access to unlimited funds. I want to know how they use it. Every purchase, every location, every choice. Discreet. Nothing in private spaces. I'm not a voyeur. I'm a man who's tired of being lied to. A pause on the line, then simply, understood. He set the phone down and sat for a while with what he had just set in motion, and part of him hated it. His father had run the family the same way. Watchers and files and leverage kept folded in a drawer against the day it might be needed, and Tae-hyun had spent his whole adult life swearing he would never become that man. But this was not about control, he told himself. It was about being able to believe in one single person before the loneliness of believing in no one finished the job it had started years ago. It was not a trap. It was a door he was holding open, and whoever chose to walk through it honestly would find him standing on the other side. He turned off the lamp and did not sleep. It began, as so many painful clarities do, at a grave. The following week marked 2 years since his mother's passing, and the family held a small memorial at the restored hammock she had loved, tucked into the folds of a quiet hillside above the city. Tae-hyun invited the 3 women, telling himself it was courtesy. He watched them the whole afternoon. Yura arrived 40 minutes late in a car she had had wrapped for a sponsorship, and spent the ceremony angling her phone toward the autumn maples, murmuring about the aesthetic and how the light would perform for her followers. Seo-yeon arrived early, moved through the relatives like a candidate working a room, and Tae-hyun caught her by the memorial table quietly asking a Hansong director whether the chairman had updated his will since his mother's death. And Simone he had not invited to grieve, only to help. And yet when an elderly aunt grew faint in the heat, it was Simone who knelt beside her, loosened her collar with a nurse's sure hands, fanned her, spoke to her in soft Korean, until the color came back to the old woman's face, and then stepped back into invisibility as though she had done nothing at all. No one thanked her, no one thought to. She refilled the water pitchers and gathered the wilting flowers and slipped out to the kitchen, and Tae-hyun found that his eyes kept following the doorway she had gone through. That night he sat alone in his study long past midnight, 3 matte black cards laid out on the desk in front of him, each one carrying no limit and no name but the one he had written on the small envelope beside it. He was not trying to catch anyone in a lie. He was trying, for once in his life, to see the truth before it could dress itself up for him. He gave Yura hers the next morning at the private terminal, where she was already photographing her luggage. She threw her arms around his neck the moment she saw him, complained he had been distant, pouted that he hadn't commented on her new bag. He slid the envelope from his coat and told her it was a gift, no rules, 3 days, spend however she liked. Her eyes went bright and greedy and delighted all at once. Are you serious? I am, she squealed, kissed his cheek, and was already dialing a friend before she reached her car. She never once asked why. In the mirror of his own car, he watched her go, holding the card up to her cheek for a photograph before she had even sat down. And he felt the particular loneliness of being generous to someone who mistook the gift for her due. He gave Seo-yeon hers that afternoon in the office, framing it as a bonus for her years of loyalty. She turned the card over in her fingers, and for half a second something calculating moved behind her practiced smile. That's very generous, Chairman, she said, and there was a glint in her eyes he had seen across too many negotiating tables. Within the hour, Chief Yoon reported that she had booked a suite at a 5-star hotel and made 3 phone calls to numbers belonging to a rival conglomerate. And if what you're feeling right now is that first tightening in your chest, that sense that this man is about to learn something he can't unlearn, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, we are only just getting started. Simone found her envelope on the service counter the next morning, resting beside her task list, with a note in his hand. This is for you, Simone. No conditions. Spend it however you wish. You've earned it. She stood over it a long time before she opened it, and when she saw the card inside, her brow furrowed, not with delight but with something closer to worry. She carried it to the study and knocked. Come in. She stepped just inside the door, holding the envelope out in front of her like it might be hot. Chairman Kang, I think this was left for me by mistake. He looked up from the desk. No mistake. It's yours. Sir, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? He almost laughed at how quickly her mind went there. You've done everything right. Consider it a thank you. Take 3 days. Use it for yourself. Live a little. Her eyes met his for one brief, honest second, deep brown, steady, and just faintly afraid, and then she looked down. I don't need anything, sir. My needs are met. I know. Take it anyway. She hesitated, then nodded, murmured her thanks, and turned to go, the envelope still unopened in her hand. He watched the door close behind her. Yura had seen a prize. Seo-yun had seen a lever. Simone had seen a weight she wasn't sure she had the right to pick up. And something in that, he thought, told him more than the other two combined. For 3 days he barely worked. He told himself he was simply resting, but the truth was he sat by the window with his phone in his hand, waiting for Yoon's updates, the way a younger man waits on a letter, and each time one came, a strange dread went through him, because he understood that he was not only testing them, he was testing the whole shape of his life, the choices that had left him surrounded by people and starving for one true thing. The first reports came that first night. Chief Yoon's voice was flat and factual over the phone, the way Tae-hyun had asked him to keep it. Yura had spent the equivalent of $90,000 in a single day, a jewelry house, 2 designer boutiques, and a deposit on a chartered yacht for a party the following evening. She had live-streamed most of it, the comments scrolling by in a river of flame emojis and envy. And at one point, Yoon noted, without inflection, a young shop assistant had brought her the wrong size, and Yura had filmed the girl's flustered apology and captioned it for her followers to mock. Seo-yeon had checked into her suite, booked a stylist and a photographer, and taken a late dinner at a members-only club with 2 senior executives from the very group that had spent a year trying to swallow Hansong whole. She had introduced herself, Yoon reported, as the chairman's closest confidant and presumed future partner. And then there was Simone. Tae-hyun heard the small change in Yoon's breath before he spoke. She bought groceries, she paid several months of back rent on her own apartment, she sent money to a hospital in the United States, and, Chairman, she bought armfuls of hot food from a street vendor near Seoul Station and handed them out to the day laborers sheltering under the overpass from the rain. A pause. She's used almost none of the card, perhaps 1%. Tae-hyun said nothing for a moment, and Yoon, who had worked for the Kang family for 20 years and rarely offered a word beyond his brief, added one more thing, and his voice for the first time was not quite flat. One of the laborers had tried to give the money back, insisting it was too much for a stranger, and she had folded his hands around it and told him, in his own halting language, that it wasn't charity, it was only his turn, and that someday it would be someone else's. Then she had pulled her hood up and walked home in the rain and bought nothing for herself at all. Tae-hyun set the phone down and sat very still. Outside, the city glittered on, indifferent, and all he could think of was one woman in the cold rain putting warm food into the hands of men the world had decided not to see. He did not go to the office the next morning. He didn't shave, didn't take calls. He sat at his kitchen island in an old sweater with black coffee going cold, and he opened the files Yoon had sent, and he read them the way you read something you already know is going to change you. The first was Yura's, and it read like a highlight reel: the boutique with the champagne service, the yacht with 50 guests he had never met, the endless carousel of poses and hashtags, the lunch bill that could have fed a village. The friend who was cruel to a waiter while Yura laughed and filmed it. 3 days of freedom, and every hour of it had been spent building a monument to herself. Not once had she texted to thank him. Not once had she asked if he wanted to come. The second file was Seo-yun's, and it was colder because it was smarter. She had wasted nothing. Every one had been an investment in her wardrobe, in her image, in the room she needed to be seen in. There was a photograph of her at that members' club, leaning across a table toward the men from the rival group. A toast raised, business cards changing hands. There was a screenshot of a message, recovered from a work device she'd forgotten was company property, in which she assured a headhunter that she could deliver insight into Hansong's internal position and that her relationship with the chairman made her uniquely valuable. There was a second dinner, too, with a financial columnist known for planting stories and a transfer to a public relations fixer whose specialty was making certain names rise and certain others quietly fall. There was even a post she had made that evening, polished and public. Success isn't luck. It's the rooms you enter and the seat you claim at the table. Nothing illegal, nothing quite provable. And somehow that made it cut deeper. He left the third file for last. He almost couldn't open it, and he didn't fully understand why. When he did, it began with a photograph of Simone standing in line at a small neighborhood market in a working-class district, not a boutique grocer, just a corner shop 2 streets from her building. Her basket was modest: rice, vegetables, cooking oil, bread, and a small bunch of flowers. She'd also bought diapers and baby formula. The receipt came to less than $80. The next image showed her carrying the bags up the stairs of a weathered apartment block and coming back down minutes later with 2 more, which she walked to a nearby clinic. Yoon's team confirmed she had quietly settled the outstanding bill of a neighbor undergoing cancer treatment, a woman she cleaned beside on her days off. It turned out, at a second job Tae-hyun hadn't even known she held. Then a photograph that stopped his breath. Simone at a community center in Ansan, in the migrant quarter where the factory workers and the undocumented and the forgotten lived, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a circle of children around her. She had brought coats. Winter was coming, and she had bought dozens of children's coats and boots and had spent the afternoon fitting them, one child at a time, kneeling to zip each one to the chin and press her thumb to each small nose to check it was warm. In the last frame, a little boy had fallen asleep against her shoulder while she signed something patiently with her hands, and Tae-hyun realized, staring at it, that the boy was deaf, and that Simone was talking to him in the only language he had. She hadn't known she was being watched. She wasn't performing. She was simply, entirely, herself. And the whole of her 3 days had cost less than a single pair of Yura's earrings. That evening, he stood alone on the balcony with a scotch he never touched, watching the lights of the yacht party smear across the black river far below. And he thought about the 3 files as though they were 3 verdicts. He had given each woman the same key to the same door. Yura had walked through it and admired her reflection. Seo-yun had walked through it and started measuring the room for herself. And Simone had stood in the doorway, decided the room wasn't really hers, and gone to give it away to people standing out in the cold. It had never been about the money. It never was. It was about what a person reaches for when nothing is stopping them. The masks were off. Now came the hard part, looking at the faces underneath. He did not sleep much in the days before he brought them together. He kept turning it over, trying to be fair, reminding himself that Yura had been raised to be admired, and Seo-yun had been raised to survive, and that neither of them had chosen the hunger that shaped them any more than he had chosen his. But fairness, he was learning, was not the same as blindness. You could understand exactly why a person was the way they were, and still refuse to hand them the rest of your life. He asked all 3 to come to the hammock on the hill that Sunday, his mother's house, the one place that still remembered how to be warm. He told himself he chose it for the quiet. He knew, really, that he chose it because he wanted the truth spoken in the one room his mother would have wanted it spoken in. They came in the late afternoon, Yura in crimson silk, luminous and bored. Seo-yeon in sharp black, straight-backed and poised, already reading the room for advantage. And Simone, who had not understood why the chairman would want his housekeeper at a family house on her day off, standing near the door in a plain cream blouse with her hands folded, so certain she did not belong that she had almost not come at all. Tea was set on the low table. For a while no one spoke, until Yura sighed and asked what the occasion was. Honesty, Tae-hyun said. Yura smirked. That sounds serious. It is. He looked at each of them in turn, the boredom, the calculation, the quiet dread, and then he said it plainly. 3 days ago, I gave each of you a card with no limit. I told you it was a gift. It was also a test. I wanted to know who you are when you believe no one is watching. So I watched. The room went cold. Yura's smile fell away first. You spied on us? I observed the choices you made freely. He turned to her. You spent $90,000 in 3 days, Yura. You filmed a shop girl who made an honest mistake so that strangers could laugh at her. You threw a party for 50 people whose names I've never heard, and in 3 days, you never once wondered where the money came from or why. Her face flushed. So what? I enjoyed myself. You told me to. I told you to spend it however you liked. And you did. You spent it entirely on yourself. She stood, snatching her bag, her voice rising to that brittle pitch he had heard too many times. This is insane. You're sick. No, he said quietly. I'm just done being blind. She waited for the apology that had always come before. When it didn't, she turned and walked out, and the old wooden door clapped shut behind her like the end of something that had never really begun. The silence afterward had weight. Seo-yeon exhaled slowly and folded her hands, recalibrating. Tae-hyun turned to her, and there was less anger in him now than sorrow. You were cleverer than that. You wasted nothing. You used the card to build yourself a ladder, a stylist, the right rooms, the right people, including a dinner with the men who've been trying to break this company apart, where you introduced yourself as my partner and offered them what you know. Her jaw tightened. So ambition is a crime now? No, but loyalty sold to the highest bidder is a betrayal. You weren't investing in Hansong. You were pricing your exit. Her composure cracked, just slightly. I gave you 5 years. I cleaned up your scandals, managed your father's old enemies, kept this empire running while you stared out of windows feeling sorry for yourself. Do you have any idea what it costs a woman to be taken seriously in your world? I built the seat I sit in with my own hands, because no one was ever going to hand it to me. And now you've decided, her eyes cut to Simone, sharp as glass, that she's the saint, the maid with the golden heart. This is a fairy tale, Chairman. A grown man's fantasy. I hope she's worth it. Simone went utterly still, her eyes wide. Seo-yeon, Tae-hyun started, but she was already rising, smoothing her blazer with hands that shook only a little. Don't. I'd have respected you more if you'd simply told me it was over instead of staging a performance to prove it. She left with more grace than Yura had, but the door closed just as hard, and for a moment Tae-hyun sat with the uncomfortable knowledge that she was not entirely wrong about him, that a kinder man might have simply spoken the truth instead of building a machine to uncover it. And then it was only the two of them, and the tea going cold, and the light coming low and gold through the paper screens. Simone had not moved. Tae-hyun turned to her slowly. I'm sorry you had to sit through that. Her voice, when it came, was barely above the sound of the wind and the eaves. I don't understand why I'm here, sir. I thought when the envelope came, and now this, I thought I was being let go. He blinked. Why would you think that? Because you've never once let me into this part of your life. And then suddenly there was money, and now a family house, And I've learned that when things change all at once for someone like me, it usually means goodbye. He shook his head, something in his chest aching. It's the opposite of goodbye. He told her then about the card, the test, what each of them had done. And when he described what she had done, the coats and the clinic bill and the food under the overpass, she looked at the floor, and her face colored with something that looked almost like shame. I didn't think of it as my money, she said. It didn't feel right to spend it on myself when I knew who needed it more. That, he said quietly, is exactly why you're different. Everyone I know takes. You gave. Not to be seen, not to climb, you gave when you were certain no one was looking. She swallowed. I'm just trying to be a decent person, sir. He leaned forward. The world isn't short on decent people, Simone. It's short on you. They sat in the quiet a moment, and then she told him the rest, because the hour was late and the walls of that house were low, and something in him had finally stopped pretending. She told him she had trained as a pediatric nurse in Atlanta, that she had come to Seoul 3 years ago on a hospital exchange she had worked her whole life for, and that a licensing dispute and an expired sponsorship had ended it in a matter of weeks. That she had taken cleaning work because it was honest and it paid, and because going home broke felt like a failure she couldn't afford, not with her little brother's medical bills waiting there. She had taught herself Korean at night from library books and children's cartoons because she refused to live in a place and be a stranger to it. She told him about the small notebook she kept, and when he asked, she took it from her bag and showed him page after page of names written in her careful hand, each with a note beside it. Halmoni at the Anson Market vendor debt. The Nguyen family heating. Minjun hearing. My grandmother kept one like it, she said. In Atlanta, she raised 6 children on a cook's wages and still fed half the street. She used to say, you give from what you have, not from what's left over after you've taken care of yourself first. She said anybody can be generous with their leftovers. So, I write down the people I mean to help so I don't forget them when it gets hard, because it always gets hard. Tae-hyun stared at the little book of names, and he thought of Seo-yun asking a director about his will over his mother's memorial table, and he thought of his mother's voice. It is warm because of the hands that tend the hearth, and something in him that had been locked for 40 years turned quietly, like a key. No one has ever told me I mattered, he said. Only what I owned, what I could give them, what I could do for them. She looked up at him, and her voice was gentle and unafraid. Then the people around you have been counting the wrong thing. Outside, the last of the light went from the maples, and neither of them moved to turn on a lamp. It was not romance, not yet, but it was the first breath of it. He walked her down the hill to the car in the dark, and neither of them spoke, and it was the most comfortable silence he had shared with another human being in as long as he could remember. At the gate she paused and looked back at the little lit windows of the hanok, glowing warm against the black hillside. It's a good house, she said. Somebody loved it. My mother, he answered. She nodded slowly, as though that explained something about him she had been turning over all evening, and then she got into the car. He stood in the cold long after it had gone, watching the place in the road where the taillights had disappeared around the bend, and for the first time in longer than he could name, he was not in any hurry to go back inside to all that empty space. The weeks that followed changed the shape of his life, slowly and then all at once. He did not sweep her into his world the way the tabloids would later imagine. He did something harder and truer. He made room for who she already was. He asked her, one evening in the kitchen, what she would do if the licensing were fixed, and when she admitted she had always dreamed of running a clinic for people who fell through the cracks, he didn't buy her a clinic. He hired the best immigration lawyer in the country to untangle her credentials, sat in on the meetings himself so she would know he was serious, and then he asked if she would let him help her build something real. He reduced the household staff, not by firing, but by shifting people into humane roles and better hours, because he had finally understood that a house crowded with people who feared you was still an empty house. Simone stayed not as a housekeeper now, but as something the two of them were still finding the word for. He arranged for her to meet with mentors, not to change her, but to arm her. Business basics and Korean nonprofit law, and the mechanics of running the kind of organization she had been carrying in a notebook for years. She resisted at first. "I'm nobody," she said. "You're already a leader," he answered. "I'm just handing you better tools." He took her, once, to a Hansong charity gala, and the elegant room did what elegant rooms do: the small glances, the whispered questions, the polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the assumption written on a dozen faces that a black woman on the chairman's arm must be a guest, or hired help, or an act of charity, and certainly not a partner. Simone felt every one of them land. She kept her chin level the way her grandmother had taught her, and when a director's wife leaned in and asked, slowly and loudly, as though speaking to a child, whether she understood what the foundation did, Simone answered her in fluent, unhurried Korean about early childhood hearing screening, about migrant health access, about the exact gap in the city's safety net. She intended to close and watched the woman's condescension curdle into startled respect, while the men beside her went quiet. "You were perfect," Tae-hyun told her in the car afterward. "I was terrified," she said. "I know, you didn't show it. And when you spoke, the whole room stopped pretending." He reached over and took her hand, and this time neither of them let go. In the weeks after that, she stopped flinching when people looked at her. She spent her mornings with the mentors he had found and her afternoons at the very shelter she used to volunteer in, except now she was the one setting the budget and hiring the staff and deciding whose need came first. She was not folding laundry anymore. At night, they ate simple food she cooked because she wanted to, not because it was her job, and sometimes they sat in an easy silence, and sometimes they argued about ideas until midnight, and sometimes they laughed so hard she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. The penthouse changed too, not in its bones, but in its warmth. Rugs from Ansan artisans softened the cold marble. A second reading chair appeared in the study. The kitchen grew a fridge covered in handwritten lists, and the smell of things actually cooked. Simone started an herb garden on the terrace, 51 floors above the river, and Tae-hyun, comically hopeless with anything green, joined her on weekends anyway, sleeves rolled up, learning the names of things that grow. And one gray dawn, after a storm had scrubbed the sky clean, she found him standing at the terrace railing, watching the light come up over the water. "What are you thinking?" she asked, handing him coffee. "I used to want to be remembered for the size of what I built," he said. "Now I only want to be remembered by the person I chose to build it with." She looked away, shy. "I'm not easy to build with. I doubt everything. I get scared." "Good," he said, smiling. "Doubt keeps us honest. Fear keeps us humble. And what keeps us going?" He touched her cheek. "Love. Not the kind they sell on magazine covers. The kind you grow in small moments. The kind that shows up even when no one's watching." She leaned into his hand. And for the first time since the day she had walked into that house, with her eyes on the floor, she let herself be someone who belonged there. The little boy's name was Min Jun. He was the child who had fallen asleep on her shoulder in Ansan, the deaf boy whose name she had written in her notebook next to a single word hearing. When the surgeon's evaluation came back and the cochlear implant became possible, it was Simone who sat with him through every appointment, and Tae-hyun who quietly made certain the cost was never a question. Minjun had no family able to keep him. His mother, a factory worker, had gone home to her own country and never returned, and the state had been preparing to move him to a facility outside the city. And so the thing that had begun as mercy became, over a year of hospital corridors and hand signs and slow, small victories, something neither of them had gone looking for, and both of them could no longer imagine living without. They adopted him in the spring. On the morning the papers were final, Tae-hyun stood in the doorway of a room that had once been a cold guest suite and was now full of picture books and soft light. And he watched Simone sitting on the floor with their son, both of them laughing at something without a single sound, and he understood at last what his mother had meant about hands and hearths. He would never forget the day the implant was switched on the way Minjun had gone rigid at the first flood of sound, the way his enormous eyes had searched the room in panic until they found Simone's face, and the way she had leaned in close and shaped one word slowly with her lips so he could match the strange new noise to something he already trusted. It took the boy weeks to begin speaking, and the first word he ever said aloud, rusty and uncertain, was her name. Tae-hyun had watched his wife-to-be press her hand over her mouth and cry in a hospital hallway, and had felt the last cold room inside himself finally warm. They founded the Jong Foundation together. Jong, that word in his language for the deep, unpayable bond that grows between people who show up for one another again and again until the debt between them stops being a debt and becomes a family. And it became exactly the thing she had carried in her notebook all those years. Hearing screening for children whose families couldn't afford it. Health access for migrant workers in Ansan. A community kitchen near Seoul Station where the men from under the overpass could sit down and eat like human beings instead of standing in the rain. Simone ran it herself, and she remembered every name because she had always written them down. She never asked to be announced. She refused the interviews and the galas and the plaques. And every week, without fail, she went back to that community center in the migrant quarter and sat on the floor with the children, and the ones who arrived after her transformation never knew she had once mopped a billionaire's marble and would not have cared if they had. They only knew she made them feel seen. The media tried, of course. First came the scandal angle, Chaebol chairman leaves heiress girlfriend for the help. Cinderella or climber? And photographers camped outside the foundation for a while, hungry for a crack, and a certain columnist ran a story that had Seo-yun's fingerprints all over it. But no drama ever came. Simone gave them nothing. Tae-hyun ignored them entirely, and eventually the noise wore itself out against the simple, stubborn fact of two people quietly doing good and asking for no applause. What had looked like a fairy tale, the world slowly realized, was something far more unusual than that. It was real. Years later, on a cold, clear night after Minjun had gone to sleep, Tae-hyun and Simone sat wrapped in one blanket on the terrace, with tea gone lukewarm in their hands. The garden lights glowing among the herbs like small lanterns, the whole glittering city breathing far below. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes I remember pressing your shirts, worrying I'd missed a crease." "Worrying about you? If I'm honest, you looked like a man who hadn't been held in a very long time." His smile softened into something else. "And now?" She turned to him. "Now I know no one is really out of reach. They just need someone who doesn't come with a price tag." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You gave me more than a home, Simone. You gave me a place to belong." She laced her fingers through his. "And you gave me something I never let myself even ask for. A life with both purpose and love in it." "I didn't think I was allowed to have both." "You are," he said. "And when you forget, I'll remind you." And every night after that, before bed, Simone would sit with their son and tell him a story not from a book, but with her hands and her voice both, so he could catch it whichever way reached him first. A story about a man who owned nearly everything and felt almost nothing until he learned to measure his life by a different scale. A story about a woman who had almost nothing to give and gave it anyway, and in doing so changed more than she ever knew. And when Minjun's small hands would ask her, "Is that story true?" she would lean close and answer the same way every time. Yes, my love. It's the truest story I've ever lived. And just outside the door, Tae-hyun would stand and listen with something wet in his eyes, understanding at last that his empire had never really been the ships or the hotels or the name on the towers. It was this, the laughter with no sound, the soil under her fingernails, the list of names she never let herself forget, and a house that had finally, after all these years, learned how to be warm. If this story moved you even a little, do me the kindest thing: you can subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment telling me the moment that got you. Was it the coats in Ansan, the notebook full of names, or the night a lonely man finally heard someone tell him he mattered? I read every single one. Take care of your people, tend your own hearth, and I'll see you in the next story.